Okay, guys, it's time for us to get up out of our chairs, and we're going to activate the brain with some nice movement and some exercises so you can take a great test. So are you ready? Step in place with me, please. These are called a cross crawl, so I want you to reach your arms across your body just like this. Now, these exercises that I'm leading you through are not just everyday exercises. These exercises are from Dr. Dennison's book called Brain Gym that helps you activate both the right and left side of your brain. And you need that when you take this test. You need it all going for you, so it's going to help you get your answers faster. And
we like to party, party. We like to party, party. We like to party, party. We like to party.
And don't forget that drinking water is extremely important. Your body needs water every 15 to 30 minutes. So if you were sitting in a 2-hour class right now, you need to have a bottle of water with you. Water improves electric and biochemical effects in the brain, and water improves information retrieval.
We live in an age where we are bombarded with information, true or false, left, right and center. As a result, it has become increasingly difficult to validate claims that are cropping up from Facebook, Instagram and others. From the recent explosion in the dietary lifestyles such as veganism or the carnivore diet to new age religions, health and body enhancements, as well as self-help gurus to name just a few. However, you also have concepts that border on the edge of absurdity. Juices blended from everyday products that could supposedly straight out kill cancer, to the recent conspiracy of the 5G internet triggering the spread of you-know-what virus. This led me to read a book called Bad Science. It was written by Ben Goldacre, a physician, and it details various scientific hoaxes that have happened. One of the plethora of hoaxes jumped at me. It was called Brain Gym. Various exercises that could help enhance learning and also reduce one's learning difficulties. It was only a single page long, but its influence is worldwide, even affecting the minds of teachers and school institutions. I did a quick Google search and I found articles made by him and others, and some of the information just spoke to me. Apparently, it is a type of pseudoscience. Processed foods do not contain any water? Alright. Brain buttons? Okay, this is getting slightly interesting. Oddly enough, this takes me back when I was a wee little lad in primary school. I remember standing in assembly listening to my English teacher talking about how we need to work hard, get good grades, you know the rest. After this, she started telling us to roll our heads from side to side, and how by doing this, we will become more active, less tired, read better, and consequently, work better in class. There were a few other exercises, but the one I remember is the head rolling one, because it's something I used to do until very recently. Even till now, I still don't know if what she was talking about was something derived from Brain Gym. It was something that I had been doing throughout my childhood and well into my teenage and adult years. The thing is that I'd never really questioned it, and I think it's because of the fact that it happened when I was young and when I was naive, and because of that I really didn't ask why it would help me or anything like that. That was until I read Ben's book. This is one of the reasons why I want to look at Brain Gym, because it has that personal connection, possibly, and also apparently it helps you learn better, so yeah, might as well. Now I want to start by saying that I am not targeting teachers specifically, it's just that the information I'm going to talk about does involve them, and how various educators were lulled into thinking that Brain Gym is a legit physical exercise on which its benefits on children are based on proper scientifically produced evidence. However, before we go in deeper, let's delve into a little bit of history. In the 1960s, Paul E. Dennison was working as a public educator in East Los Angeles. He was researching more effective ways to help children and adults with learning difficulties and this will eventually lead him to make the basis for brain gym. Then, in the 1970s, Dennison observed that people who had a difficulty in reading in his learning centers showed less access to the movement of the body and postural awareness than readers who were more adept at reading. From here, he had pursued ways to teach both coordination and differentiation of movements in his classrooms, and had constructed them in a simple way to follow. He had theorized that when readers avoid or do not cross the bilateral midline, they inhibit part of their own visual field and motor skills. Well, the bilateral midline is an imaginary line down the center of the body that divides it into both left and right sides. Now, if you could cross the midline, it basically means that you have the ability to reach the other side of the body with the opposite arms and legs. A simple example here would be crossing your legs, drawing a horizontal line across a piece of paper, or scratching the opposite elbow. Now, according to Dennison, if you are unable to cross the midline properly, then completing everyday tasks such as dressing, or fine motor skills like buttoning, or visual motor skills such as drawing or cutting or throwing, or gross motor skills such as walking, climbing or bike riding become increasingly difficult to do so. The movements devised by Paul are aimed at realigning of the head, torso and visual fields. He had further theorized that motor skills such as eye and hand coordination used in reading and writing are developed better within the setting of the whole body. In 1975, Paul had received from the University of Southern California the Phil Delta Kappa Award for outstanding research and had been given a doctorate in kickstarting the reading achievement and its link to cognitive development and thinking skills. During the 1980s, he had started to form the basis of educational kinesiology, the science of bettering one's own learning skill through body movements. He had partnered up with Gail Hardgrove, an artist and movement educator and later wife, to develop the Educational Kinesiology Foundation, which was shortened to EduK in 1987. EduK states that it is the study of drawing out the innate intelligence through natural movement experience. The Dennisons collected some of their own desired activities for learning and moving, and had organized them into 3 dimensions of movement, which will be discussed later. According to Breakthrough International website, Dr. Paul Dennison had developed these through the knowledge of the relationship of movement to perception and the impact of these on fine motor and academic skills. Others are adapted from movements he learned during his training as a marathon runner. His study of visual training learned from developmental optometrists with whom he shared referrals in the 1960s. His study of Jin Shin Jitsu, a form of acupuncture, and his study of Touch for Health, which is a form of kinesiology developed for laypeople by chiropractor John Tithe. Here's a video of Dr. Dennison himself explaining his own work.
What it would be like if you were continuously disoriented, unsteady on your feet, unable to sit comfortably in a chair, or unable to follow a line of print without the words seeming to move. This is a reality for many students in the classroom today. In 1970, I opened my first learning center. I worked with developmental optometrists and saw firsthand the relationship of vision to movement and balance. I saw students get confused and sometimes get stomach aches after reading. I showed them simple contralateral movements, balancing activities, and exercises to help them use their 2 eyes together as a team. Shortly, these same individuals overcame their learning problems, were able to concentrate and focus, find their stability, and pay attention. Today, the Brain Gym 26 are used by individuals all over the world in 80 countries to improve their visual, auditory, and kinesthetic experience. These simple, powerful exercises are used in a variety of settings, including schools, businesses, elder care facilities, and athletic training programs. I'm happy to say that EduK and Brain Gym are contributing to educational science and giving people an integrating experience of the senses as they live and learn.
They then had these published in an orange book called Brain Gym, simple activities for whole brain learning. These activities are today part of the Brain Gym program. During the 2000s, they had rebranded from Educate to Brain Gym International, and as of 2012 they had changed to Breakthrough International in order to reflect their purpose of creating an organization which can host various kinesiology programs. The main mission stated by the website is to transform lives through kinesiology-based programs, fostering the ability to thrive amidst life's changes. For this video, I will only be focusing on the Brain Gym program itself and not any of the other programs provided by Breakthrough International. What I'm going to explain next is purely theoretical. Evidence that goes against it or backs it up will be discussed throughout the video. According to Brain Gym theory, learning difficulties occur due to the inability of various parts of the brain working in a coordinated manner. This could be in tandem with the bilateral midline as discussed before, but also relates to the theory that specific brain functions can be activated via certain types of movements, and a person who lacks these certain skills, such as reading or writing, may lack them because of specific movements that were not carried out at infancy, or whenever it was naturally meant to be carried out. The Brain Gym Teacher's Edition booklet states that the brain is a three-dimensional organ. The first dimension is comprised of the left and right hemispheres and is known as the lateral dimension. The second dimension is the brainstem and the frontal lobe and is known as the focus dimension. And the third dimension is the limbic and cerebral cortex, and this is known as the centering dimension. These three dimensions, if activated via physical activities, then these various physical activities can help relax people, as well as help the learning difficulties. For the lateral dimension, exercises help with bilateral integration, or the ability to cross the bilateral midline. So like an instance of moving your eyes from left to right, this will eventually help stimulate the bihemispheric and bilateral integration. If mastered, then students would be able to write from right to left or vice versa without much difficulty. However, inability to do so is seen in children suffering from dyslexia. Focusing dimension helps to cross the participation midline or the imaginary line between which separates the back and the front part of the body, in addition to the occipital and frontal lobes. Disintegration here would mean issues regarding people to express themselves and reduce overall focus, leading to children from being unattentive to hyperactive. The centering dimension relates to the separation between the upper and lower body, which also corresponds to the upper and lower brain functions, such as the midbrain, which processes emotional content, and the cerebrum, which processes and stores abstract thought. The inability for feeling centered will lead to children to have irrational fear and lack the ability to feel or show emotion. According to Katie Held, who presented the Movement Matters, an introduction to Brain Gym is meant to address the physical components of learning, the auditory, visual, fine motor, and postural skills. Overall, this all should lead to increasing long and short-term memory, improving and accelerating learning, which helps condense the learning cycle, increases reading and math skills, creates positive changes in attention and the ability to focus, increases self-confidence, and helps with behavioral management by reducing stress quickly. All in all, Brain Gym helps prepare the brain to learn, and rather than to replace any programs, it's meant to enhance them. So in order to make sure children have the best chances to optimize their learning, activities and various movements are used to help integrate these three dimensions. Now, these activities have their roots from three main theoretical foundations which will help us understand the theory of how any of this works. These are neurological repatterning, mixed cerebral dominance, and perceptual motor training. Also known as a domain de Lakatos approach, it is the belief that progress of the individual must include all developmental stages of that species. This is because it allows for effective neurological and intellectual development, and that lack of any development from these stages would mean difficulties in later life. These difficulties would manifest themselves in learning, writing, reading, etc. The domain de Lakatos procedure looks at implementing limb manipulation to allow for development of neural pathways, which may be underdeveloped at certain stages of development due to stalling or skipping of these stages. An example of this would be if the child learned how to walk before they could crawl, then it would mean that they did not carry out the more primitive movement. As a result, it would have caused a harmful impact on the child's learning abilities. These repatterning techniques will also allow to remove any learning blocks that the child might have and hence unlock their true learning potential by mimicking primitive motions. With these manipulations, it is assumed that underdeveloped pathways will become correctly repatterned, making the child neurologically intact and ready to acquire new academic skills. The problem here is that there has been a failure to produce evidence to prove that mimicking primitive motor skills or repatterning exercises have a positive impact on the betterment of one's learning abilities. McKay, Gollagy, and MacDonald described the various treatments associated with this theory and noted that the program was ineffective in producing any positive impact. A joint statement approved by the American Academy of Cerebral Palsy, the American Academy of Neurology, and the American Academy of Pediatrics, and 7 other academies was published, and in it were concerns of the lack of empirical evidence supporting the repatterning procedures and stating that the theories surrounding these procedures were oversimplified and questionable. This comes from the notion that difficulties in learning reading and writing stem from problems in cerebral dominance, particularly those who were left-handed, left-footed, or had a mix of both left and right sides. It was purported by Orton, who had observed these difficulties in people who were left-handed, but he did not see the same problems in people who were right-handed. He also saw that reversal of letters were indicative of cerebral dominance. The solution he proposed was to integrate the left and right brain functions via combinational kinesthetic and tactile learning strategies with both auditory and visual workouts. These activities supposedly try to integrate both left and right hemispheres, and as a result should integrate the brain as a whole, thereby turning on a more balanced brain, which should allow students to learn better and coordinate themselves better. Again, research done by Mehringer and Wimmer and Mohan Singh and Mandal and Pipe didn't show any supporting outcomes for cerebral dominance, while other researchers have noted that while poor readers may have letter sequences and reversal errors like was for saw or B for D, there was no significant difference between these people and good readers for the total amount of errors made. This is based on the belief that learning problems are based on faulty integration between perceptual and motor skills. An example would be visual and sensory perception with motor skills. Now this has a similarity to the domain de Lacto approach. However, it is separate because of its focus on certain activities such as crawling, balancing on a beam, and bouncing balls. Barsh promoted this in a movement called movogenics, and it was designed to use movement patterns and to help promote learning ability. Now, the issue here is that a substantial amount of research has shown the ineffectiveness of perceptual motor training. Salvia and Yasoudike had stated that the tests were not theoretically or psychometrically adequate. They had further added, the real danger is that reliance on such tests in planning interventions for children may actually lead to teachers to assign children to activities that do the children no known good. Arter and Jenkins and Cavall and Fornes had found that research or literature dedicated to perceptual motor training had failed to show any support to the claims made in the assessment of visual, auditory, or motor skills, or to the relationship made between the training and betterment of academic skills. However, perceptual motor training still has an influence on brain gym today. Spaulding had noted that, despite little evidence validating the efficacy of perceptual motor training or substantiating perceptual motor assessments for predicting later reading ability, it continues to have an intuitive appeal for Brain Gym International. Quick recap. Brain Gym works to help people learn better by using movements. These movements can be divided into 3 groups or dimensions. Now, these dimensions are called lateral focus and centering dimension, and the various movements we do helps integrate these dimensions. This is all based on 3 main theoretical foundations, and these are neurological repatterning, cerebral dominance, and perceptual motor training. Now that I have spoken about Brain Gym, its history and concepts, it's time to get into the real meat. Which are the movements? There are 26 activities that are based on the theoretical foundations that I have laid out. These 26 movements are as follows. Why are there so many buttons? To do any of these movements, there is a kind of pre-workout stage that helps the user get ready for learning. These series of steps are known by the acronym PACE. The explanations I provide is in the viewpoint of Brain Gym, and I will try to portray them as accurately as possible. PACE stands for Positivity, Activity, Clear, and Energized. It isn't followed in this order, but instead the other way around as ECAP, a little less remarkable. Energized. This is a step where the user drinks water to stay hydrated. It is drunk to allow for replacement of any lost water, as well as to help with mental clarity, comfort, energy, and to reduce eye strain. Clear. During this step, the user is told to massage below the clavicle or collarbone while holding the other hand on the abdomen. This movement is also known as brain buttons. This phase is meant to help with the user to align the left and right hemispheres of the brain, and this will help them cross the visual midline and also helps with reading and writing. Active. This is where cross crawls are used to help activate both sides of the brain and body. By crossing the elbow to the knee of the opposite side, this would mean that you are crossing the midline and thus activating the mind and body. Positivity. Here, hookups are used. Normally, it is done sitting or standing, the ankles are crossed and the hands are crossed over the wrist with the palms and fingers interlocking. The interlocked hands are brought towards the chin and the user breathes in deeply. After this, you uncross your hands and ankles and you bring your hands together similar to the prayer posture in yoga. So this movement is meant to connect all 12 meridians. Meridians are a concept that stems from traditional Chinese medicine. They represent as paths where qi or life energy flows through, and this exercise is meant to help with the user in all sorts of ways, including maintaining positive body energy and self-control. So hookups, cross crawls and brain buttons are part of the 26 activities as I have mentioned before. So after a PACE has been carried out, you are free to do your brain gym movements. As you can see from some of the movements I have explained, while they are rooted in the theoretical foundations as discussed before, they look, feel, and act very odd to say the least. Regardless of how kooky it might look, it should be fine as long as it could give the required benefits. Right? The question to ask here is that do these activities give the user the stated improvements in learning ability? What is the research behind it, and is that research reliable? Are the theories consistent with the results? If it isn't as effective as Brain Gym say so, then why is it so famous, and why has it even been implemented in schools? To find the answers to these questions, we need to look up some scientific papers that have been published discussing the efficacy of Brain Gym. I'll be looking at papers which have done analysis on pro-Brain Gym papers. Breakthrough International, the organization which is responsible for products such as Brain Gym, does state that studies regarding the subject can be taken from Brain Gym Global Observer, formerly known as Brain Gym Journal. The website also states that studies they do have are generally not peer-reviewed, as peer-reviewed journals are required to be based on statistically proving that the intervention has made a difference, and it hasn't been done by chance. There are 2 studies which they do cite are peer-reviewed, and these are shown here. So as of writing and editing this video, when I do click on the link they provide, it goes straight to a 404 error page, so I couldn't really read these papers. What I will show next are papers which have evaluated these and other Brain Gym papers, and from there have made a conclusion on the efficacy of Brain Gym. Now, I have already shown some criticism on the theoretical foundations on which Brain Gym is based on. In this section, the analysis is based more on the clinical results of Brain Gym itself rather than its theoretical components. Over the years, many papers have been released that have had a more critical eye on Brain Gym. These papers specifically take into account various Brain Gym research papers and try to see if Brain Gym is efficacious or not. I'll be looking at 2 main papers. These papers will also include critique on the 2 main peer-reviewed articles listed by Breakthrough International. Hyatt had examined 4 peer-reviewed articles and had found problems in all of them. Kausa et al. Conducted a study which determined if the static balance of children can be improved via using Brain Gym. This was measured by using a modified stork stand, so that would mean standing on one foot while the other is placed behind the knee of the supporting leg and hands on the hip. The experiment had a pre-test and a post-test, and the stork stand was used as a measure for the 2 treatment groups. Post-test results had a significant difference, indicating that Brain Gym did in fact improve static balance in children. However, Hyatt noted some problems here. The test was conducted by classroom teachers, of which the number was unknown, and if whether or not these teachers were trained in Brain Gym was not specified. Also, the study did not mention if any safeguards or rules were put into place to ensure treatment fidelity. Now, treatment fidelity is defined as the methodological strategies used to monitor and enhance the reliability and validity of interventions. It is important because it allows us to reliably administer interventions, in this case Brain Gym, to the experimental group. If the intervention is not administered properly and treatment fidelity is not maintained, then this brings into question the results of the experiment itself. Hyatt concludes that this paper cannot be interpreted with an acceptable level of certainty due to the various methodological errors. He also puts into question if the stork stand is educationally relevant or not. Another study done by Sift and Kausa looked at if the response time of college students can be shortened if exposed to 2 types of visual stimuli after using Brain Gym activities. Hyatt noticed that the authors did not note any methods to reduce treatment fidelity. The study itself was split up into 3 groups, which were control, intervention, and movement group. The intervention group here is Brain Gym. The results showed significant effect, with the Brain Gym group having a shorter response time, followed by the movement group and then the control group. However, Hyatt noted that the paper did not show any differences between the groups before the intervention was given. Moreover, he had stated that the response time could not be attributed to the intervention as the interaction effect was not identified, and instead the main effect was given, which was that the response time in all 3 groups was decreased. Kamisa reported participants scored significantly higher on perceptual motor skill tests after 1 year of using the Brain Gym programs. Hyatt saw a few problems here. The activities chosen were not reported, and the reason why each one would be suitable for the treatment subsequently could not be said. The treatment and duration of each activity wasn't given either, and the study didn't benefit from a control because it wasn't added. The author also added that because the effects of maturation in the participants wasn't controlled, then it would be impossible to attribute any gain in perceptual motor skills to brain gym. Participants also served as their own controls when it came to academic measure. This measurement was derived from using grade equivalent scores on a norm referenced test. From this, the author assumed that academic growth would be the same each year. This has its own problems as many factors play a role in academic growth. The final study that Hyatt looked at was done by Santos et al. This study looked at improving the success of Hispanic students in higher education. There were two groups, one of which listened to Mozart and participated in brain gym activities during the day, while the other group did normal daily school activities. The author deemed the intervention group to be a success. However, Hyatt noted that comparisons between the groups were based on teacher ratings of students and the use of percentage increase in mean scores through academic tests. Determination of statistical significance was not done. Hyatt also noted that the author did not have methods which addressed issues regarding treatment fidelity. Hyatt concluded the following: although neither the theoretical foundation nor the peer-reviewed research base supported the claims of brain gym, the slick marketing approach made it appear that brain gym could provide the cure to all that ails humankind. Another review by Spaulding et al. Addressed the efficacy of the papers that Hyatt had reviewed. It used guidelines which had certain indicators which were grouped as either essential or desirable. According to Spaulding, a paper should fail no less than one of the essential quality indicators and demonstrate at least 4 of the desirable quality indicators to be considered of high quality status. For acceptable quality status, it should again fail only one essential quality but needs to have at least one of the desirable quality indicators. For an intervention to be considered evidence-based practice, there needs to be an overall a minimum of 2 high quality studies or 4 acceptable quality studies demonstrating the efficacy of the intervention. After Spaulding applied the guidelines and indicators to the various studies critiqued by Hyatt, the review showed that every study failed to meet the threshold of essential and desirable quality. Spaulding went on to say that each study failed to show information of training provided, implementation of proper procedures to ensure qualities of participants were comparable across conditions, and did not show how measures were taken to ensure treatment fidelity. Spaulding also mentions the use of testimonials or anecdotes, such as, the problem noted by Spaulding is that while these testimonials are passionate and compelling, they are hard to verify, thereby making it impossible to claim that the improvement can only be explained by the participation in the program itself. Added to this, Spaulding is also concerned on how time used on brain gym could instead be used for interventions that could be verified. The worry for Spaulding here is that management and resources could instead be used to find solutions for those who need the extra help. This alongside the problem that these very children and their families are attracted to such claims made by brain gym may actually hinder research where help and support can develop from. With its theoretical foundations in question, as well as the practice of it, it's hard to see why it would have such an influence, and to the extent it has spread all over the world. So far, it's in over 80 countries worldwide, and its influence is gaining more and more ground. They even proudly present a video of all the countries where brain gym is being taught on braingym.org.uk. A side note here, while I was researching on brain gym, one thing I noticed is how certain methods of brain gym have changed depending on where it's practiced. They have been elaborated on, evolved from the normal 26 activities as laid out by Dr. Dennison to something more unique. From moving your fingers in a certain way so it could improve your memory to one exercise that would make anyone from the subcontinent laugh their eyes out. Now, it's just not regular brain gym, but power brain gym. Whether these exercises have any research done on them remains to be seen, and if it is vetted by Breakthrough International is not known, but this does seem to be the result of the international appeal that Brain Gym has garnered. What is interesting, however, is the creative freedom taken in making these exercises, and if any other theories or practices have been combined to make them. In 2006, the UK had seen a rise in the number of brain gym programs being taught in schools. This alarmed many, as schools took something up which was considered a pseudoscience in the scientific community. A piece made by Charlie Brooker for The Guardian highlighted that perhaps the Department for Children, Schools and Families confused fantasy with reality the day it endorsed Brain Gym. The article also states that the British Neuroscience Association, the Physiological Society and the charity Sense About Science had all written complaints about Brain Gym to every local educational authority. Dr. Dennison also had an interview with Newsnight host Jeremy Paxman, in which he was told to explain the various claims made by Brain Gym.
Let's see now if we can talk to the brains behind Brain Gym, Paul Dennison, who's in Los Angeles. I'm sorry we couldn't hear you a moment ago, Mr. Dennison. Let's just check we can hear you now. Can you just explain what a brain button is, please?
Yep. We have on our body certain reflex points that help us organize the body and the brain. And holding these points help to activate developmental movements that they're called micro-interventions to help improve the connections in circuitry. And the apparent results are that people get better sense of where they are in space, sense of left and right, and able to move better. We leave the explanations to the experts. We've been explaining these the best we can over the years, and we're open to inquiry and develop the best explanations for them. But the fact they do indeed work.
Well, yes, I mean, you say in your teacher's manual here, when you talk about hookups, that they connect the electrical circuits in the body. What exactly are these electrical circuits, please?
Well, it's my opinion that we are electrical, that we do have circuits and connections. And when we bring our energy to the midline, to the central point, we are breaking out of the reflex to go from one side to the other and bring things back to the center where we can be calm and relaxed.
It is your
focus, and this is.
You say it is your opinion that we are electrical, Mr. Dennison. Are you medically qualified?
No, I'm not medically qualified. I'm an educator, but I study and read, and there are studies to show that we do have electrical. Acupuncture and other procedures are based on the fact that there are electrical circuits in the body, and we are building on the shoulders of these people who have been doing this for thousands of years.
Is the fact that you're not medically qualified explanation enough for statements in this teacher's manual of the kind that processed foods do not contain water, which you know is arrant nonsense?
Yeah. So we're interested in helping children, and these things work, and we explain them the best we can, and we are going to edit the manual and rewrite it so that it's...
But you can see that
really
that is
simply...
Absolutely.
Your help in helping us point these things out.
But you appreciate that is nonsense, isn't it?
The best of my ability to help children and to help teachers have a context for why they are doing the movements.
But if your manual can contain idiotic statements like that, is there any reason to believe anything else in it?
No. I do believe those statements are true, and time will prove that they are.
And you believe processed foods don't contain water, do you?
Instruments to do that.
You believe processed foods don't. You believe processed foods don't contain water.
I had a context for that statement, meaning that pure water is more immediately active and available to the brain, and that I'm not attached to either.
Well,
but that was the best information I had at the time. Huh?
Perhaps you should have said that.
Hmm?
Perhaps you should have said that instead of saying what you did say, which is nonsense.
Yeah. 15 years ago, that was the best information I had, and no one has complained about the teacher's edition until
That processed
this
foods
point, and
don't
we're
contain
really
water.
glad that we can.
Let me ask you,
we're
Mr.
glad
Dennison.
that we can.
Sorry to cut across you. There's a delay on the satellite. Just let me ask you this: how many schools in Britain are using this program of yours?
The Brain Gym program is embraced and loved in 80 countries around the world, and I have no idea how many schools use it. But children love it because they learn better. Teachers love it because they have kids that are ready, willing, and able to learn and love to be in school. And parents like it. And these are tools that I've developed as a reading specialist over my whole career, because I just love to see a child come to life when he learns.
Mr. Dennison, thank you very much indeed. Okay, good.
Okay.
Thank you so much. I'm sorry about the technical difficulty earlier.
By 2018, the Office for Standards in Education, Children's Services and Skills, or also known as Ofsted, had warned teachers about gimmicks such as Brain Gym. The Ofsted chief, Amanda Spielman, commented that some policymakers and practitioners are constantly looking for the next magic potion that will infallibly raise standards. Indeed, despite the history of snake oil, white elephants and fashionable gimmicks that have in the main been debunked, there remains a curious optimism that the elixir of education is just around the corner. She further added that we don't need an elixir to help raise standards because we have the tried and tested ingredients we need. This brings us to a greater question of how did this all happen? Why did schools take up Brain Gym? An article in Nature Reviews Neuroscience by Paul A. Howard-Jones looked at various myths or neuromyths and how they come about. A neuromyth, first described by Alan Crockard in the 1980s, is a misconception generated by a misunderstanding, a misreading, misquoting of scientifically established facts to make a case for the use of brain research in education and other contexts. He states a few factors which lead to neuromyths to become prevalent among people and educators. These are planting the seed, cultural conditions, and biases. Let's go through each one. Planting the seed. This sets in the confusion of the scientific fact or misunderstanding. While neuromyths can be propagated by frauds or scammers, examples of people knowingly doing this is hard to find. Howard-Jones states that it's more likely that this occurs due to misinterpretation of genuine facts and promoted by victims who hold a sincere but overall deluded fixation that a theory or fact would lead to some revolution within science or society. Howard-Jones uses the drinking 6 to 8 glasses of water per day. There isn't any evidence for underperformance in children who do not meet these standards. In fact, he cites a study which states that dehydration can influence cognitive function. However, this didn't stop the UK educators to believe that children who didn't meet this requirement could lead to their brains shrinking down. Cultural conditions. Howard-Jones cites this as the terminology and language used by neuroscientists and educators. It can be used in transforming scientific knowledge into self-propagating, misleading ideas through misunderstanding of concepts and not fully having the evidence on hand. He continues that propagation of a myth is likely to happen when counter-evidence becomes hard to access, and this leads to the myth becoming protected from any sort of critique. This counter-evidence generally can be found by specialists in the field, and in the case of Brain Gym, it would be neuroscientists. While non-specialists generally have a harder time to find this information, and as a result the chances of misinterpretation, ignoring crucial facts, or not finding the right information is more likely to happen. Paul states that biases could go beyond just cultural biases, but also encompass emotional and developmental ones. He states that oversimplification of certain facts could introduce certain biases, and from here misunderstanding occurs. An example of this was differences between UK and Chinese teachers. Chinese teachers tend to favor a higher genetic influence when it came to intelligence, and as a result they felt less able to help children who could not achieve as high as other students. On the other hand, UK teachers held more of the view that genetics has a lower influence on intelligence, and as such, education can remedy learning problems. The Chinese perspective comes from the idea of dualism, the idea that brain development is less open to influence through the mind and is more biologically programmed. The UK perspective would come more from a material one. These biases influence on how education is taught, but also how certain concepts will be interpreted. Different perspectives will interpret things differently, and as a result, different biases may lead to various myths to be formed. Another bias is religion. Hall stated that the UK, a country with many reporting no affiliation to religion, only 15% of trainee teachers believe that the mind results from the spirit or soul acting on the brain. While in Greece, which has a more religious demographic, 72% people believed in this idea. Emotional bias can manifest in teachers who prefer techniques which are easy to implement, are low of cost, fun, and well received by students. Paul also adds that the association of neuroscience can be expected to further boost the apparent credibility of the explanations. These explanations are used to promote the idea as well as its desirability. He cites Brain Gym as an example of this. Pickering and Howard-Jones also conducted a study of 189 teachers at educational conferences and came down to the conclusion that teachers believe that neuroscience can help children develop their learning and as a result want to use neuroscience in the classroom. While neuromyths are not sold as snake oil, it is found that neuroscientific methods are an easy sell for companies to educators, as it's easier to sell something with science jargon and good-looking infographics and brain scans, rather than giving the dry and raw science, which is often filled with data and stats and requires patience to read through. As a result, something could have nonsensical information in it, but as long as the presentation is good and you have the right words, well, you have yourself a neuromyth. In terms of Brain Gym, exercises can help develop a bond between the teacher and the pupil, which helps the child to be more keen when it comes to learning. At the same time, the prevalence of neuromyths is also due to not finding the right information, where to start from, finding the right data, verifying it, finding expert opinions on it, and having a conclusion. This is something that is not very easy to do, especially if you're not part of the scientific community. For this reason, scientific research, and enlarge the scientific community, needs to get out of its ivory tower and make itself more understood by the general masses. Brain Gym is a neuromyth. While it does have some interesting techniques and runs itself on anecdotal information, as well as the occasional peer-reviewed article, studies which have looked at it in depth beg to differ. Its theoretical foundations seem to be way off the mark, and according to some studies, a simple jog would probably do as much good, if not even better, than, let's say, a crosswalk. Hello, Future Me here. A quick side note. Many studies have come out stating the benefits of general exercise on learning. These exercises do not revolve around the theories that Brain Gym uses, but looks into a protein known as brain-derived neurotrophic factor, or BDNF. BDNF supposedly helps synapses change and adapt to various stimuli, and this response is known as synaptic plasticity. The current understanding is that this should not only help with memory and learning, but also help us understand stress-related disorders. Okay, back to the past version of me. It's not that it wasn't started with good intentions, but it's something which has survived on the wrong information, and a larger note to this is how well it has casted a spell on educators. This is more telling of the lack of collaboration between the science field and that of educators. Teachers themselves have it hard enough trying to teach the next generation, and are always looking ways of making learning fun and more accessible for their students. They don't always have the right means or ways to verify all the practices they may conduct, and as a result of this, it leads to the spread of misinformation. Science should no longer feel like a secretive guild. It should open its doors and have its information be more accessible to those who want it. It shouldn't, however, make things oversimplified. There needs to be a fine line between accessibility and oversimplification. And while some of the information may not always be easy to understand, the scientific community should be there to offer a helping hand. The Neuroeducational Research Network at the University of Bristol has made efforts over the past few years to foster better ties between the fields of neuroscience and education. This is a step in the right direction, but more needs to be done. Also, I would recommend for anyone who is interested in the subject to look into it yourself. I can admit I was a bit biased after reading about Brain Gym. There are many papers which are for and against Brain Gym, but they need to be carefully evaluated. As for me, when I did my own research, this is the conclusion I came down to. For this reason, I would recommend you do your own research and make your own conclusions. Wow, this is one heck of a long one. It's the first time I made something like this, so my pacing, writing and editing are probably all over the place. Let me know what you thought of it and what I could improve next time. Yeah, I know it was a bit of a dry subject, but stuff like this is hard to explain without it not becoming dry. It took time to research all of this and to make this video, so thank you for your time and patience.